Ever feel like you're drinking from a fire hose? Like you're trying to catch up on a topic or get ready for some huge meeting, and you just need that knowledge thoroughly but fast.
I know that feeling. You're handed the stack of stuff and you're like, okay, but where do I even start?
Exactly. And that's where we come in, right? You give us your source material, and we kind of distill it down to the really good stuff, the stuff that makes you go, oh, now I get it.
And the material you sent us this time, wow, it's about some really big themes, personal struggles, how people overcome them, the whole spirituality thing, and how communities play a role in that.
And all of this is seen through, well, you could say the lens of this. Um, Carnage One Only, and a bunch of theological ideas that kind of tie in.
Right. It's a deep dive into Carnage 1nOnly's world for sure.
And you gave us quite a bit to work with. We've got these Carnage One Only YouTube video transcripts. Titles like Carnage One Only Book of 1LP3, Carnage One Only Affirmations, Acknowledgement and Awakening, and, let's see, The Rise of the Sun. Carnage One and Only.
Some really powerful stuff there.
We also had this PDF, Psalms of the One All, and then there are excerpts from another PDF, notes 250-320-235-332.pdf. Oh, and some images too. Prayers, creeds, whole bunch of theological discussions, yeah.
Lots to unpack. So maybe we should start with Carnage 1nOnly himself. What kind of picture emerges from all this?
Yeah, good point. Let's do that. What really jumps out is this idea of him being like this beacon of creativity and resilience too, taking these challenges and turning them into art.
You really get the sense that this guy has gone through some stuff. And instead of letting it crush him, he's channeled it all into something so expressive, so creative.
And even early on, it sounds like he was dealing with a lot. He was diagnosed with ADHD at 6 years old, which probably contributed to him feeling like he didn't quite fit in.
He even describes school as this battleground of misunderstandings, which I think so many people can relate to. That feeling of you have so much potential, but the traditional systems just don't seem to get you.
Absolutely. And that's how creativity comes in, right? For him, it wasn't just a hobby. It was almost like a lifeline, a way to communicate when words weren't enough.
It's amazing, isn't it? Instead of being stifled by these challenges, he took those struggles and made them into these really compelling narratives, especially in his music and lyrics. It makes you think, sometimes our great obstacles actually lead us to discover our unique gifts.
I love that. It's like he didn't just survive, he actually transformed those experiences into something so meaningful and resonant. But here's the really cool part. It wasn't just about him and his personal expression. There was this clear desire to use his art to lift others up, this belief in the power of shared experiences to connect with people.
Yeah, that comes through really strongly, this idea that by being open about his own journey, he could inspire others who might be going through something similar.
Exactly. And it wasn't just talk either. The sources mention how active he is in his community and with his fans. It wasn't enough to create. He wanted to make a real difference with his art.
And that's where you see the real power of art, right? It's not just self-expression. It can actually bring healing and create this sense of collective strength and support.
So what's the big takeaway here? I think Carnage One Only's story really shows how powerful art can be, not only for processing personal struggles, but also for connecting with others, building a community based on shared experience. Now, let's shift gears a bit. The material you sent also talks about this manifesto for sacred rebellion and something called the alchemy of pain. That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, and I think it's at the very heart of what Carnage 1nOnly is trying to communicate. There's this core message that really resonates. You are not broken. Your cracks are not flaws, but fissures where the divine light seeps in.
Whoa. That's really beautiful imagery. And it's so powerful, right? It's like those things we see as weaknesses, as imperfections, they can actually be points of connection to something so much bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And then there's this other line that really struck me. Pain is not the enemy, silence is. It's almost like a call to action, urging us to speak our truth, to not be afraid to show our vulnerability.
It really connects back to Carnage One Only's story, right? Finding his voice through his art, using it to break the silence.
Absolutely. It's like he's saying, stop trying to pretend you're perfect. Stop hiding your pain, embrace it, transform it.
And the manifesto actually lays out these tenets of the unshackled, as he calls them.
Right. So first, there's sacred rage, which might sound a bit scary, but it's not about destructive anger. It's more about this fierce passion to tear down what he calls the crutches of performative faith. Like he's challenging us to move beyond empty rituals and get to the real heart of things.
And accountability is framed as love with its boots on, which is such a powerful way to think about it. Like, real love isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it requires tough love,
Then there's the idea of the communion of the cracks, this idea that we need to create spaces where we can be truly ourselves, where it's okay to be vulnerable, where tears are liturgy, silence is sacrament, and I don't know is the purest prayer. I think that's so profound.
It's like real connection comes from being real, from letting go of the need to have all the answers.
Exactly. And then there's this idea of creativity as covenant. It elevates art beyond just a hobby or a profession. Art becomes, as he puts it, holy ground, a rebellion against the lie that you're ordinary.
And there's that line, I wrote my way out of the coffin, so can you. It's incredibly inspiring, right? Like, if he could do it, maybe we can too. Maybe we can use our creativity to break free from our own limitations.
And the manifesto even addresses leadership. Leaders as ladders, he calls it. The idea being that true leadership isn't about power or control, but about serving others, helping them to reach their full potential. He says, and I love this quote, "We follow the Nazarene, not the narcissist."
So the emphasis is on humility and service. And finally, there's this concept of words as weapons, but not in a violent sense, more like tools for liberation. He says, every you matter is a Molotov against the dark.
Wow, what imagery. He's really emphasizing the power of our words to uplift, to inspire, to fight against injustice. But it doesn't stop there. The manifesto goes on to describe blueprint church as crucible, this idea that the church itself needs to undergo a radical transformation.
And it starts with the unlearning. Tearing down those facades we put up, admitting that we're not perfect. We will disappoint you. And shifting the focus away from superficial questions to those that actually address real pain. Where does it hurt? He asks.
I love that he suggests that the misfits, those who don't fit the traditional mold, should be the ones leading the way.
That's so interesting. Then there's the reckoning, critically examining our traditions, questioning things that might be harmful or outdated, like burn what suffocates, keep what breathes light.
And finally, the awakening. Infusing our everyday lives with the sacred. Making poets of accountants, prophets of single moms, turning pulpits into soup kitchens.
It's about taking faith outside of these formal structures and putting it into action in the real world.
And the manifesto ends with this beautiful benediction for the sacred mutineers. It speaks directly to those who are struggling, who are holding on to hope in the midst of chaos. Stitching hope from your own unraveling, he says. And then this powerful declaration, you are the revolution.
It's like he's envisioning this huge shift, this return to something more authentic, more primal. He calls it a kadam. And while it's not explicitly defined, it seems to suggest a kind of Edenic state where, as he puts it, the CEO Jesus dies and the carpenter king rises, and where even our stars are starlight.
I love that imagery. It's so hopeful, so redemptive.
And the postscript is just as powerful. The altar is empty now. Bring your unmasked self. Come feast on your brokenness baked holy. It's such a radical reimagining of what it means to be part of a faith community, isn't it? Embracing our imperfections, being fully ourselves.
Absolutely. It's a call to authenticity, to vulnerability, to action, to find the sacred within our struggles and to use those experiences to connect with and support each other. Now, the material you sent takes a really interesting turn here. It starts talking about cultivating Christ-centered communities and the dangers of spiritual manipulation.
Yeah, this is a crucial shift. The sources really emphasize this non-negotiable call to servant leadership. They even reference Matthew 20.25-27, where Jesus says, whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. It's a pretty radical redefinition of what leadership should look like.
Right. It's all about rejecting those worldly hierarchies, those power structures we see all around us. Instead, leaders are called to be servants, to put the needs of others before their own.
And they stress the importance of accountability over autonomy. It's not about leaders having all the power and making all the decisions. It's about transparency, about being open to feedback and critique.
Makes sense, because when you have unchecked power, that's often when things go wrong, when people start to manipulate others for their own gain.
Exactly. And that leads us to the next point, the importance of biblical preaching anchoring truth in the text. It's about sticking to the scriptures, focusing on what's actually there, rather than twisting things to fit a certain agenda.
They call it expository faithfulness. And for me, it's about going beyond just plucking out your favorite verses. It's about understanding the whole context, the historical setting, the original intent of the authors.
That makes so much sense. And it's a powerful safeguard against manipulation, right? When we have a solid understanding of the scriptures, it's harder for people to use them to control us.
Absolutely. And it's not that emotion has no place in faith, but the sources seem to emphasize that those emotions should come from the text itself, from its power and urgency.
Okay, so we have this call for servant leadership after biblically grounded teaching. What else makes for a healthy community? The sources actually give some pretty specific habits to look for.
The fifth one is to embrace imperfection with integrity. And there's this great quote, "We will let you down," which is so disarming, right? It's acknowledging that no church is perfect, no leader is perfect.
It sets realistic expectations, which is so important. And they also talk about conflict, not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as a potential catalyst for growth. Like, if we can learn to navigate disagreements in a healthy way, it can actually bring us closer together.
I like that. Then they talk about the need to foster open dialogue, to move away from these carefully crafted statements and encourage real, vulnerable conversations. There's this phrase, "let's explore this together," which really captures that spirit.
And they also mention something called barren discipleship. The idea being that everyone, not just the leaders, should be actively studying the scriptures, using resources like lexicons and commentaries to really dig deep.
It's about empowering people to think for themselves, to not just blindly accept what they're told.
I love that. Another key habit is prioritizing servanthood over systems, this idea of reversing the pyramid, where leaders see their role as serving the congregation, not the other way around.
It's a complete shift in perspective, isn't it? Putting the focus on the needs of the people rather than the institution.
And finally, they talk about the importance of guarding against enmeshment, which basically means avoiding that false harmony where everyone has to agree all the time.
Right. True unity actually thrives in the midst of diversity, in the midst of honest disagreement and debate.
Makes sense. So the sources provide all these guidelines for healthy communities, but they also give some really thought-provoking questions for leaders to ask themselves. These are things that all of us, even if we're not in leadership positions, could benefit from considering.
Like, what are my motivations? Why am I making this decision? Are my methods ethical and transparent? And am I wielding power responsibly? It's a good reminder for all of us to check our egos and make sure our actions are aligned with our values.
And if you find yourself veering off course, there are some concrete corrective actions suggested, like consistently returning to the core principles of Scripture and intentionally empowering the laity, giving more people a voice in decision-making.
That makes sense. And when it comes to protecting ourselves from spiritual manipulation, they emphasize two key theological safeguards: Christ as head and sovereignty of the Spirit.
Right, so Christ as head means that Jesus is the ultimate authority in the church, not any human leader. And sovereignty of the Spirit is this idea that you can't manipulate God, that there's no formula for getting what you want.
It's a reminder that our relationship with God is personal, dynamic, and ultimately beyond our control.
Absolutely. And for congregations themselves, the sources recommend some practical steps, like educating members about biblical discernment so they can spot manipulation when they see it, and celebrating quiet faith, those who live out their faith in their everyday lives without needing a lot of fanfare.
It's about valuing authenticity over performance, right? And they also suggest regularly auditing church practices to make sure they're aligned with Scripture and these principles of healthy community.
It's about being proactive, being vigilant, being willing to question things. And the overall message is really clear. The church should be a reflection of Christ, prioritizing truth and transparency above all else.
And leaders should see themselves as stewards, as servants entrusted with a sacred responsibility. The final charge is to preach the word with great patience and careful instruction. So all of this focus on healthy communities really lays the groundwork for understanding spiritual manipulation.
Okay, so how do the sources define it? Well, they say it's basically the distortion of Scripture and the misuse of authority for the purpose of control. And it often involves exploiting people's vulnerabilities, preying on their insecurities.
Which is just awful, right? And they break down some of the key mechanisms involved.
Right. The first one is scriptural exploitation, which includes things like proof texting, taking verses out of context to support a particular agenda, and cherry picking, ignoring passages that contradict your viewpoint.
It's like building a house of cards with Scripture, using it to manipulate people instead of enlightening them.
Then there's emotional coercion. This might involve using music to whip people into a frenzy, creating this artificially heightened emotional state, or equating certain physical manifestations like trembling or falling with genuine spiritual experience.
Right, and it often discounts the quieter, more internal expressions of faith, making people feel like they're not really experiencing God unless they're having some kind of outward display.
Then there's enforced conformity, which might involve gaslighting, making people doubt their own perceptions and experiences, and labeling those who disagree or ask questions as hard to receive or HTR.
It's a way to shut down dissent and make people afraid to speak up.
And finally, there's enmeshment, which involves demanding an inappropriate level of loyalty to leaders, often placing that loyalty above their relationship with Christ.
It's like creating this unhealthy dependency where people are afraid to question or challenge anything the leader says.
It's a really insidious form of control. So how do we protect ourselves from this kind of manipulation? Well, the sources delve into some interesting historical and textual foundations that can serve as safeguards. They talk about this practice called nomen sacra, which was this early Christian tradition of abbreviating divine names in manuscripts, like using shorthand for God or Lord.
And it was done out of reverence, right? Not as a way to control how people understood these names.
Exactly. But the sources also point out how, much later, certain translation choices like the Recovery Version's exclusive use of Jehovah can actually embed specific doctrinal biases into the text.
So it's important to be aware of these biases, to recognize that not all translations are created equal, and that's where the German Bible Society comes in. They've produced these really important critical editions of the Bible, like the Nestle Aland for the New Testament and the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia for the Old Testament.
And these editions are based on the oldest and most reliable manuscripts, like Codex Vaticanus, with the goal of being as accurate and objective as possible.
So for you, it means you're getting as close to the original text as possible without the added layers of interpretation or doctrinal agendas that you might find in some other translations.
Right. And it's interesting how these critical editions actually include critical editions, variant readings, and textual notes, which can help dismantle proof texting.
Because by showing the different ways a verse has been translated or interpreted throughout history, it makes it harder to isolate a single verse and twist its meaning to fit your agenda.
And the sources really emphasize the importance of making resources like lexicons and cultural guides available to everyone. It's about empowering lay people to engage with the scriptures directly, to study and interpret for themselves, just like the Bereans do in the book of Acts.
It's about fostering biblical literacy, encouraging people to think critically and not just passively accept what they're told.
And they also talk about the importance of educational safeguards, like teaching biblical languages and providing historical context. Because when you understand the original language and the cultural setting in which a text was written, it can really shed light on its meaning.
And it can help you avoid some of the common pitfalls of misinterpretation. So the sources then contrast healthy versus manipulative leadership, and they give Billy Graham as an example of a healthy leader.
Right, they highlight his integrity, his focus on proclaiming the gospel, his willingness to be transparent and accountable.
And in contrast, they list some warning signs of manipulative leadership, like excessive legalism, isolation of the leader from accountability, and the cultivation of misplaced loyalty.
So instead of encouraging people to think for themselves and question things, manipulative leaders often demand blind obedience and create an environment of fear and control.
The solution? Well, it goes back to promoting Christ as the ultimate head of the church and valuing authenticity and healthy dissent over blind obedience. Now, we need to talk a bit more about the German Bible Society because they play such an important role in all of this.
They've been around for a long time, actually. Their roots go back to the Canstein Bible Institution, which was founded in 1710. And from the beginning, they've been all about making the Bible accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or social status.
And their work has had a huge impact on biblical scholarship. They've produced some of the most widely used critical editions and translations of the Bible, like the Nestle Aland, the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, Luther's German Bible, the Good News Bible, and tons of lexicons, concordances, and other resources.
Their mission is to make the Bible available to people all over the world. And they support translation projects in countless languages. And they're committed to textual accuracy, to using the best available manuscript evidence to make sure their translations are as close to the original as possible.
And that commitment to accuracy is so important, especially in light of what we've been talking about with spiritual manipulation. When you have reliable translations that are based on solid scholarship, it makes it harder for people to distort the scriptures for their own purposes.
Absolutely. And speaking of manipulation, the sources go on to discuss some of the dynamics that can lead to unhealthy power structures in churches. They talk about gaslighting and embellishment, citing the work of psychotherapist Sean Mortensen, who's really an expert on these kinds of systems.
Right, and these systems can be so insidious because they often start out with good intentions, like a desire for unity and harmony within the church. But when that desire for unity becomes more important than truth and accountability, that's when things start to go wrong.
Exactly. And they give some really clear examples of gaslighting tactics, like constantly emphasizing that we are all like-minded and subtly dismissing any dissenting voices, or minimizing people's concerns by saying things like, no one else has this issue.
It's all about creating an environment where people are afraid to speak up or challenge the status quo.
And the consequences can be really damaging. When dissent is suppressed, it can lead to leaders feeling like they're above reproach, like their decisions are always in line with God's will. And it can create a culture of fear and silence, where people are more concerned with protecting the institution than they are with pursuing truth and justice.
So the contrast with healthy leadership is so stark. Instead of shutting down questions and silencing dissent, healthy leaders encourage dialogue and debate. They welcome challenges and are willing to be wrong.
Like the Apostle Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test everything, hold fast what is good.
Right? It's about using our critical thinking skills, being discerning, not just blindly accepting what we're told. So, how do we bridge this gap between scholarship and the practical work of building healthier communities? Well, the sources emphasize the importance of textual integrity.
Right. When we have reliable translations of the Bible, it gives us a common foundation for discernment. It makes it harder for people to twist the scriptures to support their own agendas.
And the discussion of nomen sacra comes up again here, highlighting how those early abbreviations of divine names were expressions of reverence, not attempts to control people's understanding.
And the availability of critical editions of the Bible can help us distinguish between later cultural interpretations or theological biases and the original intent of the biblical authors.
So, what can churches do to promote healthier environments? Well, the sources recommend encouraging open dialogue, questioning traditional interpretations, amplifying marginalized voices using scholarly resources, and rejecting false unity.
It's about celebrating diversity, embracing healthy dissent, and being willing to challenge the status quo. Which brings us to our final topic, the significance of divine names. The sources explain that the various names used for God in the Bible aren't just random labels. They actually reveal different aspects of his nature and character.
Right, like they start with El, which is a basic term for God, meaning mighty one. And then there's Elohim, which is also translated as God, but it's plural in form, hinting at the idea of a triune God.
Then we have Yahweh, the most personal name of God, meaning I am who I am. It emphasizes his self-existence and his covenant relationship with his people.
And there are all these compound names that incorporate Jehovah, like Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide, Jehovah Nissi, the Lord our banner, Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals, and Jehovah Kidkenu, the Lord our righteousness.
Each name revealing a different aspect of God's character and his relationship with humanity.
And then there are other names like El Elyon, God Most High, Adonai, Master and Lord, Yahweh Suri, the Lord is my rock, and Yahweh Roy, the Lord is my shepherd.
Mikweh Israel, Hope of Israel, Megan, Shield, Migdal Oz, Strong Tower, Atik Yomen, Ancient of Days, and Kadosh Israel, Holy One of Israel.
Elkanah, Consuming Fire, Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is Peace, Abba, Father, and Emmanuel, God with us.
And finally, they talk about the seven spirits mentioned in Isaiah and Revelation, which are often interpreted as representing the fullness of the Holy Spirit.
So the takeaway here is that by understanding these different names, we can gain a deeper and richer understanding of who God is and what he's like.
It's about moving beyond a simplistic view of God and embracing the complexity and mystery of his nature. Now, the final piece of the puzzle is Carnage 1nOnly's perspective on affirmations, acknowledgement, and awakening. He talks a lot about the power of the mind and how we can reprogram ourselves through practices like meditation.
Right. He emphasizes this idea of quieting the external world and connecting with what he calls the source. And he gives this specific exercise where you visualize something you know really well, and then you gradually erase it from your mind, zooming out until there's nothing left but your own awareness and this sense of connection to the source.
It's about detaching from those limiting beliefs and thought patterns that we often carry without even realizing it. And he talks about this RPG method, which is basically about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to see things from their perspective.
It's a way to develop empathy, to understand how our actions affect others. And he emphasizes this idea of the mirror effect. What we think and how we see ourselves is reflected back to us in our experiences.
So if we want to change our reality, we need to start by changing our thinking, changing our beliefs.
He encourages us to see ourselves in others, even in those who are being cruel or hurtful, as a way to cultivate compassion and understanding. And he talks about the importance of random acts of kindness, of giving people the benefit of the doubt, allowing them to surprise us.
And he distinguishes between ego, which isn't just about being arrogant, but about having this self-centered perspective, and humility. It's about being willing to admit when we're wrong, to learn from our mistakes, and to put the needs of others before our own.
He also talks about learning from dark situations, finding the lessons in our pain, and using those experiences to become more compassionate and understanding. He even writes his own practice of visualizing the pain and suffering in the world and sending out positive energy.
It's like a form of active compassion, right? And he uses this powerful affirmation, I am one with the source. The universe flows through me. All that I need is already mine. It's a declaration of abundance, of connection, of limitless potential.
He also talks about quantum pauses, taking brief moments throughout the day to just be still and reconnect with that source. And he recommends some simple breathing exercises for shifting your energy and releasing tension.
He says that awakening isn't usually some big dramatic event, but a series of subtle nudges and insights. And he encourages journaling as a way to capture those insights and reflect on them.
He outlines a 3-week trial for rewiring your mind. The first week is about becoming more aware of your thoughts and beliefs. The second week is about releasing limiting beliefs that no longer serve you. And the third week is about reprogramming your mind with empowering affirmations.
And he stresses the importance of consistency and patience. It takes time to change those deeply ingrained thought patterns.
He also delves into some really fascinating stuff about brain waves and the power of collective consciousness. He mentions Dr. Persinger's work on global resonance and this idea that we can actually transfer information during dreams, maybe even through the Earth's magnetic field.
He talks about Ingo Swann's research on remote viewing, accessing information at a distance. And he discusses the brain's natural frequency of 7 Hz and its connection to geomagnetic activity.
One of the most interesting points he makes is that it's not just the intensity of energy that matters, but the pattern. Like he references an experiment where they flashed a light at people and it actually affected brain activity at a distance.
Whoa, that's wild. And he even touches on photon emission from the brain and the practice of chanting, or matas, as a way to activate the pineal gland.
It's a really mind-blowing exploration of the interconnectedness of everything.
So there you have it. We've covered a lot of ground today. From Carnage 1nOnly's personal journey and the dynamics of spiritual communities to the importance of textual integrity and the power of our beliefs.
It's amazing how all these different threads are woven together, how personal transformation, spiritual discernment, and theological understanding are all interconnected.
So as we wrap up, here's a final thought for you. How might these insights about Carnage 1nOnly's evolution, about spiritual authority and manipulation, about the significance of ancient texts and practices, offer you a new lens through which to view your own search for meaning and connection in a world that often feels increasingly complex?
Perhaps it's time to reconnect with that inner source, to explore those practices that resonate with you, and to embrace the power of your own conscious choices to create the reality you desire.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking and enlightening as we did.
And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning of your own journey of exploration and discovery.